So welcome to the fourth session of this workshop, which focuses on AI and community lived experience. And we will start with the next speaker, who is Allison Gardner. She's a lecturer of data science in the School of Computing and Mathematics at Keele University. She works on the IEEE P7000 Global Initiative on the Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems, and specifically P7003 on algorithmic bias, providing a framework for algorithmic impact assessment. She's a co-founder of Women Leading in AI, and she speaks nationally on AI ethics, machine bias, and the need for diversity and regulation in the field of AI. She has also acted as a consultant for a variety of companies on AI ethics, algorithmic bias, and diversity in tech. In her statement today, she's going to focus on the 3 R's of AI ethics: the responsibility, the recourse, and the redress.
Thank you. I am just going to share my screen and hopefully this will work nicely with you all. It's a very simple PowerPoint presentation. And I am going to present with a slightly different hat than being an academic, because I'm also in the UK a local councillor, and the area that I am a councillor of contains an area that has quite significant social deprivation, and I deal a lot with residents who have quite severe difficulties in life and find it very hard to navigate quite complex systems, societal systems that they're required to do, and even dealing with people who, when you ask them to come in to deal with an unpaid bill or tax bill problem, can they come in? They can't afford a £2 bus fare, and they don't have the physical ability to walk the 3 or 4 miles that they have to do to get there. So these are the sort of people that I think about when I'm addressing issues to do with algorithmic harms, particularly in use cases that deal with welfare and benefits and health. But of course, this expands to a much wider arena with regards to any financial processes going forward. And what really started me thinking about the 3 R's, as it were, was the was the mass protests that happened in 2020, thanks to, due to the off-call algorithm that was predicting the A-level grades for students. And this was done as a result of COVID and the fact that the students couldn't sit their exams, so they developed an algorithm to try and anticipate that. And it was done in a manner that looked at past school data and a rating system from the teachers rather than teacher grade assessments, because they were worried about grade and inflation. And because of these sort of policy decisions and features that went into to feed the algorithm, it built a data set that was fundamentally biased and absolutely augmented the societal biases within education and how these schools are funded and so on and so forth. And it compounded that, and it got hard coded into an algorithm and outputted in a set of very measurable outcomes in terms of A-level grades. And this was a result that happened all in one day to a large number of people, many of whom were from privileged backgrounds or at least had the advantages of very good education, getting to the A-level standards, with parents, with schools all supporting them, and various other interest organisations, including of course universities. So there was quite a powerful group of people around these individuals impacted by this erroneous algorithm, shall we say. And there are people who argue that there was nothing wrong with the algorithm, it was the data that went into it and the policy decisions that fed that data. But this hit the streets and this hit the deadlines, and it was one of the most unusual chants I've ever thought I'd ever hear chanted in a protest. And there's a very polite student in the centre here stating his opinion of the process, but refusing quite to go all the way with a naughty word. And this hit the media, and it got sorted out. Immediately there was a response. They demanded recourse, and they demanded redress, and they wanted their A-level results changed. and the system was changed in accordance with that. And that was a fantastic experience. But of course, we know that there are many other examples when there are erroneous systems out there that can have a huge impact on individuals. And there was another one that was dealing around about the same time as the Elfqual algorithm, where it was to do with visa streaming tool, which was biased, and this was dealing with people who were applying for visas to come into the UK and were being rejected on certain rules that were presented by this algorithm. And initially, it was designed, it was denied that there was such an algorithm, that it was automated, that there was human in the loop. But with pressure groups, it eventually met, and they agreed that this was a problem. It went to law cases. And you start thinking about the really, really desperate people in my ward who maybe don't have the power or the money to make these claims, but are subject to these decision-making algorithms. And this leads you to thinking about responsible AI and the type of all responses. If you work within the field of AI ethics, you know that terms such as responsible AI, trustworthy AI are bandied around quite a bit, and people can be pedantic about the differences between the two. But this is really about the responsible development of AI systems so that it mitigates against any biases and harmful outcomes that can occur. And some people will focus purely on the technological approaches, but others will take a more holistic view and look at the whole life cycle and decision-making process around that, from concept to retirement of the system, which is something that we're debating in P7003 at the moment. And then there is a set of responsibility principles that seem to be becoming commonly accepted, such as transparency, explainability, fairness, privacy and security. You can insert in there other systems such as reliability and safety, but they tend to sort of come as subsections under other of these top headings. But these sort of generally are the ones that you go about. And of course, it's mentioned in the Asilomar principles that they expect this to be sort of thinking of considerations of the moral implications. And if you're a philosopher and you understand, well, morals, that's culturally dependent, but the moral implications of the use and misuse of the systems that they're developing, so to have some ethical oversight of that. But responsibility is a very strange term, and it has it can be debated, and it can in its use be subject to ethics washing. And there was an interesting article by Tigard that I read, and he sort of categorized a responsibility in three ways. So he said about normative responsibility, which is about the intent, if you like, of wanting to do correctly, being moral, in the development, and the possessive, which is addressing the duty or the obligation that you have, that to do good, and within that is inherent is that this idea of you should be able to answer for that responsibility. And then lastly, he mentions descriptive responsibility, and this is about the actual process of addressing and with concrete actions, how you answer to that, and you go forward and just responding to those questions that might be answered. And so here we think about expectation and accountability, and that's great, and that is fantastic. But core to any of this is that if somebody has had their benefits denied to them or their healthcare denied to them, and they are extremely ill, how are they to know? How can any normal person know? I'm subject to an automated decision and I want to question this under Article 22 of the GDPR. They won't necessarily know. So there's a lot to do with transparency here, with responsibility, and in enabling and empowering the citizen to actually enact their right to challenge, which is deeply missing, I think, within regulation that's being developed. Assume that they can, assume that it's been responsibly developed, and this allows then the person impacted to seek recourse. So they're made aware of this system. And there's some of this is my own sort of definitions here, where a lot is to do with informed recourse. So there's this idea of transparency, of publicly labelling that you're being using an AI system, that you have. I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I'll be shutting down quickly. With AI registers, food labelling marks, and this other feedback loop. That is fantastic. there is an interesting article looking at actionable recourse, which is looking at the technological processes about if somebody's had a loan decision denied to them, they can actually query this and say, I want you to run this through again, but I want you to remove this feature from the processing because I think that inhibited the decision making. So you might want to remove gender, for example, and want to see what the outcome is. So that sort of looks at sort of counterfactual fairness there. And of course, the term that we're all very familiar with is legal recourse. And I'm going to jump ahead now because of time. But what is really lacking in a lot of the responses to the ethical principles and the regulations and the standards that are going out there at the moment is this concept of redress. So that if you have been impacted negatively and you've gone through the various recourse mechanisms and you are still not getting a fair outcome and a resolution and you've had severe harm caused to you, how are you going to have that rectified and what redress are you as an individual going to experience? And that is deeply, deeply lacking at the moment. And in the GDPR, you can be fined, but that fine goes to the Treasury. If you want to actually have personal redress, you have to go through the law courts and you won't necessarily get support to do that. And again, think about that person in my ward who has got mental health difficulties, for example, who has no money. How are they going to go through that stress unless they are discovered by an advocacy group? But if they have digital exclusion, they're not going to be able to search for that. Who is going to find them? And often we find out that these situations occur when tragic consequences have happened. So redress is a huge, huge point to raise when we look at the harms that can be done to communities and groups and individuals. We have the AI bill going through at the moment in consultation. And again, here we see that redress is actually neglected within this bill, and certain organisations have highlighted this quite quickly. So the European Digital Rights Advocacy Group said that this is a huge miss for civil society, discriminating groups and consumer workers. The European Economic and Social Committee said, look, you really do need a complaints or redress mechanism for individuals suffering harm. So it's no good just fining, you know, and trying to nudge corporations to do good. You have to think about these individuals have a really citizen first, human centered approach to how you do these regulations. And there are others. In the UK, the online harm bill falls short of dealing with redress and personal complaints, but it just says you can do a super complaints process. But who knows what a super complaint is, and who certainly a lot of my residents wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how to go about doing this. So I call upon regulators to try and think from a slightly different perspective and have this empowering of citizens' rights to recourse and redress that you can be through. Other sectors have it. You know, healthcare has good examples, you know, that you can do that. The finance sector has good examples where people can seek redress. They have ombudsmen. So why can't we do it within the field of AI? And, you know, I can't reiterate enough, the AI AlphaQual algorithm came to light because it happened all in one go with a large number of well-connected privileged people on the main part. But please do think about the people who have had healthcare and benefits removed by an automated decision with maybe a low-paid, inexperienced worker as your human in the loophole person to get around various aspects of that. And think about that person and how maybe over time, you know, what harms are being done to them, and people have lost their lives because of these things. And we need to rethink how we approach our ethics, our standards, and our regulatory approaches from a very human-centered and citizen-empowering way. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing.